Hello everyone, this is Dr. Houck with your discussion video for module assignment number 7. Let's take it from the top. Number 1, which of the following would not fall under the healing ethnomedicine? That shouldn't have been too difficult. Chemotherapy sort of sticks out there. That's manifestly allopathic, we might say. Number 2, which of the following statements would be associated with the faith healing community? Well, we can, if this answer doesn't hit you at the outset, then you can use elimination. So you could certainly eliminate B, and you could certainly eliminate C. That would leave A and D. And when you get into predestination, that's something that Christians argue over. There are some people that are on one or another side of the table on that issue. But anyway, getting to the answer, it's A. And I would refer you to page 140 under the heading Illness and Healing Understood in a Theological Context, especially in the second paragraph there, where it reads, in the broadest sense, religious healing relates sickness to a divine scheme or purpose. It makes sense of what might otherwise appear to be a frightening, meaningless, dangerous experience by providing an overarching theology in which illness has significance, etc., etc. Anyway, so everything does have a reason to A. Number 3, that would be the Kung Bushman. Do that. Number 4, faith healing is primarily associated with Protestantism. Of course, Southern Baptists are Protestants, but that's a little bit too narrow. More generally, Protestantism is the better answer there. Number 5, as a general rule, faith healers distrust conventional. Well, no, not as a general rule. You did read where some are suspicious, but a general rule would mean virtually all or most. And so according to the information you have in the Kinsley text, that is false. Just a few are suspicious, but that doesn't make that sentence true. So it's false. Number 6, according to the philosophy of faith healing, individuals are not responsible for their sickness. We'll check out characteristic number 4 and spiritual renewal, where getting a person, quote unquote, right with God is an important aspect of faith healing. So clearly, in other words, the individual does bear some responsibility for their sickness. So that's false, as it's written. Number 7, Occam's razor would encourage us to begin with supernatural hypotheses. Well, no, because those would be the most complicated, the most unrealistic, the most fantastic explanations on the table. That should come as a last resort. So that's false. We should start with natural hypotheses first, since those are can be data-based and dealt with objectively in the empirical world we live in. Number 8, that's true. Emic explanations are generally notoriously unreliable. I mean, imagine your typical exorcist from any culture describing what's going on. And then imagine a more universal or psychological sort of approach, or an anthropological approach. So that's generally true. That's true. Number 9, yes, that came right from that extra article I posted for you on Christian Science, and it's right there in the article near the bottom. That is true. Number 10, if the anthropological understanding of psychotherapeutic healing is correct, then a Kung Bushman individual will receive no benefit from a Christian faith healing ceremony. Well, that is true, because this is an if and then statement. So given the if, yes, that will be true. Because remember, psychotherapeutic healing is intimately and strongly linked to a particular form of enculturation, a particular culture's idea of gods and spirits and sickness and healing and so forth. So that's true. Number 11, the book of Acts, or you could just write Acts, A-C-T-S. Number 12, Christian Science is that denomination. Number 13, Benny Hinn, H-I-N-N. Number 14, right out of the Kinsley text, William Branham, B-R-A-N-H-A-M. And also right out of the Kinsley text, Catherine Coleman for number 15. Deliverance Ministries, these are North American exorcism groups who claim to be able to heal people's afflictions by delivering them from a variety of different demons that are responsible for these afflictions. So it would be sort of like the North American Protestant version of what we refer to as exorcism cross-culturally. The penal interpretation of evil, well, of course, penal has to do with punishment. And so this interpretation of evil says that we will experience misfortune and sickness and so forth because we're being punished for something that we've done by God. So misfortune and sickness and suffering is punishment from God for some transgression. Okay, that's what the penal interpretation of evil is. Discernment in a faith-healing context. In a faith-healing context. Well, here the claim is that the healer can actually, quote-unquote, see inside the patient, or they can, quote-unquote, see the inner condition of the patient. And so their sickness and their affliction is revealed to them. Now, of course, they claim the power of God to do this. Okay? James Randi is the magician slash skeptic who exposed Peter Popoff on the Johnny Carson show. He also exposed another faith healer by the name of Grant. He's basically a skeptic who devoted his life to exposing frauds like Popoff and also Uri Geller and people of that nature. There's a great documentary out about James Randi, and the title escapes me, but probably if you type in James Randi, and I think on Netflix you'll find it. Anyway, I highly suggest you watch it. It's quite good. Number 20, state precisely what faith healers are claiming about the practice of faith healing and sickness. Well, what they're claiming is that God, or Jesus, or however they want to state that, is actually reaching down through another individual and passing through them the power of God, or Jesus, and that power is used to heal sickness. So God or Jesus is active here, working through a conduit. The conduit would be the healer, to bring about healing. Number 21, it's in the upper right quadrant because there are two axes. One is expectations, one is outcome. All right? Well, the expectations are very, very high that healing is going to take place. And it's not surprising that the perception is also very high that healing took place. The perception that healing took place. Okay, so it's all about expectations and outcomes. Describe the anti-structural aspects of faith healing and some of the faith healers themselves. Well, of course we know what anti-structural means. We've talked about shamans and how they must become anti-structural in order to do what they do. So if we look at it in terms of those, I think it was 11 different faith healing characteristics. Look at number 1. They work in a transient, sort of temporary setting. Traditionally, these were held in these traveling sort of revival tents. So literally without a permanent structure to work in. So that made them transient. That made them anti-structural. They weren't part of the everyday mode of living, the everyday mode of things. This was just something that was temporary. It just showed up intermittently from time to time. So that's one issue. You could also look at number 8. God uses them to heal. In other words, they are special. Think of the shamans who are special because they're anti-structural. Well, these folks are very special too because for whatever reason, God is using them to heal people. God works through them. So that would be another thing you could note. Number 10, just thinking of those different characteristics, some of them come from extreme impoverished backgrounds, from extreme poverty, and that would be anti-structural, another sort of anti-structural aspect of faith healers. And so whatever else you may come up with, there's a few things we could do there, but just as long as it addresses the issue of being anti-structural, then that's fine. That's the important part. Number 23, state 3 aspects of faith healing that are similar to characteristics or practices associated with shamanism. Well, one obvious one is exorcism. They attempt and they claim to exorcise spirits, just like shamans do. Some of them work with a healing spirit. Think of the Hevro and the Pasuks. So some of them claim to actually work with a healing spirit. Discernment, seeing sickness. Think of the Yanomamo and the Natima that they take that puts them in a trance state, allows them to see things. Think of the Coon Bushmen. When their numb is boiling, they enter Kia. And they can actually see sickness in their patients and attempt to pull it out. So discernment would actually work here. There's an atmosphere that must be carefully, what's the right word here, created in order for healing to occur. In virtually all healing rituals, shamanistic healing rituals around the world, there are certain things that must be in place, certain things that must be done regarding who should be where, the right things should be said, maybe singing, dancing, whatever. So the appropriate atmosphere must be created for healing. The issue of spiritual renewal is something else you could look at. We've seen that, for example, confession is important in other healing practices. And also, too, they're looked at as being conduits of healing power. So just as shamans are conduits to the spiritual world, faith healers are conduits, so to speak, between God, or Jesus, and the patient. So those are just some things you could have mentioned. I only needed 3. 24, through what process do the congregants, participants at a faith healing ceremony become pre-adapted to expect healing to take place? Well, for one thing, as you notice, one of the characteristics of faith healers, I forget which one, is that they're excellent preachers. So they're able to whip the crowd up into a frenzy. And then, of course, the atmosphere itself is very impressive with the crowds and the singing and the fervent praying. There's also the reputation of the healer himself or herself. So those are just some things you could have mentioned. Excuse me. Number 25, how how might we rigorously test a faith healing claim? Rigorously test a faith healing claim. Well, first of all, we need to be careful that we're not dealing with a malady that could just go into remission without treatment, because that does happen. So we need to be on the lookout for that. Second, we must make sure the person has received no medical treatment. That's important too, because there's so many cases where people, it could be, for example, in ICU for weeks, and they also have people praying for them, and when they come out healthy on the other side, of course, they're all enthusiastic about praising the power of prayer, but really don't say a whole lot about spending 3 weeks in ICU. Right, so we've got to be careful about that too. So there must be no medical treatment done, because that way we would make sure that that's not what the cause of healing was. All right, so the process would be, first we need to start with a thorough medical exam by an impartial doctor. Okay, like a third-party doctor, knows nothing about what's going on. This is just a random patient. They do a good exam, thorough medical exam, and thoroughly report on their condition with all the appropriate tests recorded, etc. And then, of course, you go through the healing ritual, and then finally, when it's over, again, they're subjected to a very thorough medical exam, preferably by a different physician, and then you continue to follow up on their condition. And by the way, as I mentioned in my video, this has never been done as far as I know. Number 26, Peter Popoff tricked his audience into believing that he actually had the ability to heal them by wearing a small transistor in his ear, into which his wife backstage fed him information from things like prayer cards and other information that was picked up along the way. James Randi exposed him, as I mentioned earlier, on the Johnny Carson show. By the way, you do know Peter Popoff popped up about 15 to 20 years later hawking that miracle spring water. Goodness gracious, Americans, huh? All right, 27. Well, this should have really been, I mean, it's a long answer question, 23 points, but it should have been rather easy because I was very careful in being very specific in regard to what I wanted. First of all, what I want is information on the efficacy. And of course, I guess if you didn't know what that word meant, you could have looked it up, but the effectiveness, like how effective is faith healing. And what I want was empirical studies or statistical reports. In other words, the kind of things you'd find in the New England Journal of Medicine or something along those lines. The sources should be impartial. And just to make sure you didn't make this mistake, I also added anecdotal accounts, in other words, one person telling a story, or polling data. That's the thing that's really amazing to me. Before I put this little warning here, if you want to call it that, students were often quoting polls that we're taking. You do realize that polls are useless in regard to determining the reality of anything other than people's opinions and perceptions. Okay? But it has nothing to do with establishing empirical reality about anything. People continue to make that mistake. Like that they'll report on some poll as being some sort of substantiation of their position. But it's not a substantiation of anything other than you're telling us about people's perceptions and opinions, which can often be, and quite often are, very wrong. Okay. Anyway, so that's you had to be careful. I wanted three. I wanted you to discuss three of them. There's a couple of good ones. Simpson's study on Christian Science, where he compared the alumni from a Christian Science college, I think it was Principia College, with alumni from KU. That was a good study. University of Kansas. Another study compared Christian Scientists and Seventh-day Adventists. There was ASSER's, ASSER''S study on faith healing in 172 children's deaths. I'm sure you came across that. Anyway, so I just needed some good empirical study / statistical report, and I needed you to comment on them. So I'll read what you had to say. All right, thank you.